Ghost. Actual. Part 1. The weight of holding. The wind came off the ridge in slow, patient waves, and Nora Vance let it move through her without resistance. She had been lying in the same position for 11 days. Not the same approximate position. The same position, same angle of her left hip against the rock, same placement of her right elbow in the shallow depression she had carved out with her own body weight over the first 48 hours, same distance between her eye and the scope. She had learned a long time ago that precision was not something you achieved in a single moment. Precision was something you built by eliminating every variable you could control one at a time until the only variable left was the target. She controlled everything she could control, the rest she watched. Below her in the long, shallow bowl of the valley, 46 armed men moved through the morning in the unhurried way of men who believed themselves safe. She knew their rotations. She knew which of the sentries on the north ridge took a longer pause at the eastern corner, and she knew it was because he had a bad left knee that stiffened in the cold. She knew the commander took his radio calls at the same flat rock near the center of the valley at roughly the same time each morning, and that he always turned his back to the west when he spoke as though the words were too important to let the wind carry them away. She knew all of it. 11 days of knowing. Her orders were simple. Observe, document, report. Do not engage. Under any circumstances, do not reveal your position. The United States government had spent 2 years and a sum of money she had never been told trying to get eyes on the man who ran this valley, the man who had moved through 4 countries and left enough dead Americans behind him that his name had become the kind of name spoken carefully in rooms with the doors closed. Griffin Unit had given Nora the assignment 6 weeks ago. She had spent 3 of those weeks preparing studying terrain maps and satellite imagery and wind tables for this particular ridge at this particular elevation in this particular season. She had been in position for 11 days, and for 11 days she had been a ghost. That was the word they used inside Griffin for what she was. Not a sniper, not a field operative, a ghost. Something that existed in a place without being part of it, something that watched without touching. The discipline required for it was a kind of discipline most people could not understand, because it was not the discipline of action. It was the discipline of absolute sustained inaction in the face of everything that screamed at you to move. Nora understood it better than anyone in the unit. She had learned it the hard way. 6 years ago on a ridge in a different state in a different valley, she had watched Danny Calder take 3 rounds in the open ground below her position, and she had not fired. She had the shot. She had it clean, a single target, no complications, the kind of shot she could make in her sleep. Her orders said, hold. Her orders said the observation assignment was worth more than any single life. Her orders said the mission comes first, always the mission comes first. She had held. She had watched Danny Calder die at a distance of 800 yards while her finger rested outside the trigger guard exactly where regulations required it to be. And she had carried that every single day for 6 years like a stone she had swallowed that was too large to pass and too heavy to ignore. She had built her entire professional identity around the necessity of it, around the brutal arithmetic that said one life against a mission's worth of intelligence was not a trade worth making. She had told herself the story so many times it had become something close to belief. Close. Not all the way. She was thinking about Danny not for the first time that morning when the helicopter appeared at the eastern edge of the valley. She heard it before she saw it. The specific thrum of rotor blades at altitude coming in lower than any civilian aircraft had a reason to be moving with the deliberate purpose of a military approach. She tracked it through the scope without shifting her body, just her eye adjusting, and she saw it clearly. A UH-60, American markings. Her first thought was confusion. Her second thought was dread. Because she knew this valley, she had mapped every approach and every exit, and she knew with absolute certainty that no American flight plan should have brought anyone here. This was not a transit corridor. This was not a coincidence. Her third thought arrived at the same moment the valley below her erupted into coordinated motion. Not scrambled, panicked motion. Coordinated, prepared. The 46 men below her were moving to positions they had already scouted, taking cover. They had already chosen, bringing weapons to bear on an arc of sky they had been watching and waiting for. She watched the man with the shoulder-mounted launcher emerge from behind the eastern rock formation, and she understood, in the time it takes a heart to complete one full beat, exactly what was about to happen. She could not stop it. Her order said, do not reveal your position. The missile left the launcher. The helicopter screamed. It did not go down cleanly. Nothing real ever did. She watched through the scope as the tail assembly came apart as the whole aircraft began to rotate in the sickening way of a machine that has lost its ability to fly but has not yet accepted the fact, and then it fell. It fell hard and fast, and it hit the valley floor in a rolling impact that threw debris across 50 yards of ground, and the dust cloud that rose from it was so thick that for nearly 30 seconds she could not see anything at all. She kept the scope steady. She waited. When the dust began to clear, she counted. 1 figure emerging from the wreck. 2. A third moving wrong favoring one side. 4. 5 being helped by the fourth. 6. A 7th pulling himself free with the specific deliberate movements of a man overriding his body's objections through pure will. 7. She counted again because she had to be sure. 7 survivors. She moved the scope to the wreck itself, to the section of the cabin that had taken the worst of the impact, and she saw the 8th. She could tell from the angle he had not survived the crash. She filed that away in the part of herself that kept records of things she could not afford to feel yet. 7 survivors, and they were moving. She tracked them as they ran low and fast toward the western rock face, toward the narrow slot canyon she had noted on day 3 of her observation. She had noted it as a possible defensive position. She had noted it because she always noted everything that might matter, even when she was not supposed to be the one using it. They found the canyon. They pushed inside. The men below began to organize their response, and she watched them do it with the close attention she had given every movement in this valley for 11 days. She counted the machine gun positions taking new angles. She counted the mortar crew setting up 200 yards northeast of the canyon mouth. She counted the radio operator moving to a new position, and she thought with a cold and clinical detachment that she had trained herself to feel, instead of fear, about what it meant that there was a radio operator working in this valley on a dedicated band. It meant the jamming was active, deliberate. Someone had built this trap. Built it with patience and intelligence and the specific knowledge that an 8-man SEAL team was coming here today to this valley at this time. That was not something you stumbled into. That was not luck or timing or the enemy being in the right place. That was a leak. Somewhere inside the American military apparatus, someone had sold this mission. The men in the canyon had no way to call for help. They had no way to know that help existed. And outside, 41 armed men were organizing a systematic assault on a position that could only be approached from one direction. Nora ran the numbers without wanting to. She had always been precise with numbers. 41 against 7. One of the 7 down, possibly critical. Jamming active, no comms. No QRF, no air support, no one on the way. Every minute that passed, the enemy had more time to organize, to bring up the mortar, to coordinate the angles. The math was not complicated. The math had only one answer. She kept the scope on the canyon mouth and she did not move. Her orders said, hold. She had held before. She knew what holding looked like at the end. The first assault came fast, the way first assaults always did, with confidence in numbers, and the assumption that speed would solve everything. She watched a dozen men rush the canyon mouth from the north and east, firing as they moved, and she watched the return fire from inside the canyon cut the assault apart. The Americans were precise. They were controlled. They did not panic and they did not spray, and 3 of the rushing figures went down in the first 15 seconds, and the rest broke back into cover. She felt something she did not name. She had been feeling it for 11 days every time she watched something unfair happen in the valley below her and held her position, because that was what the mission required. But what she felt now was larger than anything the previous 11 days had produced, because the people in that canyon were not abstractions. She could see them through her scope. She could see the way the big one with the gray-streaked beard repositioned his rifle after the assault broke, checking his sight picture with the automatic precision of a man who had done this so many times. The movements lived in his hands rather than his mind. She could see the younger one, the one who had been helped from the wreck, sitting against the canyon wall, with someone's hands pressed against his left side. She could see the commander. She had been watching him since the helicopter went down. He was the last one out of the wreck. He was the one who had pulled the others into the canyon, counting them as they passed him, touching each one as they went through, like he needed the physical confirmation that they were real. He moved with the particular economy of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for the moment when everything went wrong. And now that the moment had arrived, His body knew exactly what to do, even if the situation was objectively impossible. He was trying to reach the radio. She could see him working it, his jaw set, his thumb pressing the transmit button in the pattern of a man who already knew he would not get through, but who had to exhaust every option before he accepted that fact. The radio was dead. She knew it was dead. She had known it was dead the moment she saw the dedicated operator in the valley below take his new position. She watched the commander set the radio down. She watched him look at the canyon mouth, then at his men, then at the radio one more time. And she watched the understanding settle over him, the way understanding always settled, not with drama, not with collapse, but with a quiet rearrangement of the face, a closing down of something that had been open. He knew. She had been in enough impossible situations to recognize the face of a man doing the math and arriving at the same answer she had arrived at. The second assault was worse. The enemy used smoke this time and suppressive fire, and the discipline inside the canyon held, but not without cost. She saw one of the Americans take a hit along the side of his head, a graze probably by the way he kept moving, but the blood was immediate and dramatic, covering half his face before he wiped it with his glove and went back to his rifle. She saw the medic take a round through the shoulder and keep working with one arm, packing a wound on the young one's side with his remaining hand. She watched all of it through the scope. She did not fire. Her orders said hold. Then she heard it. She had kept her radio receiver open on the tactical band out of professional habit, the same reason she kept notes she would never need and tracked variables that were not part of her assignment. The tactical band was white noise, jammed solid, but she kept it open anyway because she was the kind of person who preferred to know even when knowing changed nothing. Through the static she caught fragments. A voice. Male. Controlled but only just. She adjusted the receiver micro-increments, working the signal the way she worked a firing solution, eliminating variables one at a time until the signal resolved into something she could use. Not done until I say we're done. Then static. Then clearer. Not our fault. Say it back to me. She found the band. She locked it. And she listened to Cole Drummond talk to his men in the last minutes of what he believed was the end of all of them. He was not dramatic about it. That was the thing that reached into her chest and took hold of something she had not let anyone touch in 6 years. He was not delivering a speech. He was not performing for posterity. He was talking to his people the way a person talks to the ones they love, when the pretending is over and only the truth is left. He told them they had not failed. He said the word fault very carefully and precisely, and he made each of them say it back to him. She heard the young one's voice. Eli. She had been listening to this team long enough to know their names, to know their voices. She had spent 11 days with their radio traffic as her only company, and she knew them all the way you come to know people you have never met, but have watched with close attention over a long period of time. She heard Eli Marsh say the words the commander asked him to say, and then she heard Eli say something else in a smaller voice, a voice he probably did not intend for the radio to carry. He said, "Do you think it hurts? At the end, do you think it hurts?" Nora's hand moved. Not a decision, not a calculation, not a weighing of mission value against human life. Her hand moved the way a hand moves when the body has already made a choice that the mind is still catching up to. She had heard that question before, 6 years ago on a different ridge. She had not heard Danny Calder ask it. He had never gotten the chance. She had just watched him go down into the dust and rock, and the question had lived inside her ever since, as the question he might have had and never asked, because she had held her position and there had been no one there to answer him. Eli Marsh was 23 years old. He was bleeding into the rock of a canyon in a valley that had been built to be his grave. And he was asking the same question. Nora settled her cheek against the stock. She put her finger on the trigger. 6 years of carrying Danny Calder came to its end in that single movement, not with resolution, not with peace, but with the specific and irreversible recognition that there were some things a person could not hold and still remain a person. She had reached the edge of what she could carry, and she had found at the edge that she was not willing to add another name to the weight. She exhaled slowly, the way she always did before a shot. She let the calm come. It came the way it always came, not gradually but all at once, like stepping from a loud room into a sudden and absolute silence. The valley below her clarified. The wind registered in her nervous system as data rather than sensation. The distance to the target became a number rather than a gap, and the number had a solution, and the solution lived in her hands. She found the machine gunner on the north ridge. He was 200 yards past what most people would have called the limit of reliable engagement. He was tucked behind his gun with the comfortable certainty of a man who believed himself out of reach. He was wrong. She breathed out. She fired. The gunner dropped straight down behind his weapon like something had been removed from inside him, and the gun went silent. And at the distance she was working, no sound reached the valley for just over a second after he fell. That was the thing about working at this range. The death arrived before the explanation. She was already finding the next target. Below her she could feel the valley change. She could not hear it. She was too far away for voices, but she could see it through the scope. She could see the way the remaining enemy fighters began to move differently, the way their movements acquired a new quality, something between caution and confusion. The body language of men who have been absolutely certain of their advantage and have suddenly, without warning, become less certain. She picked the squad leader organizing the next assault. She picked him because he was the organizational node. Remove him, and the assault lost its shape. She fired. He went down in the middle of giving an order, and the men around him looked at each other and then looked everywhere, up at the ridges, at the sky, at the western faces of the canyon walls, trying to understand where the death was coming from. A second later, the sound arrived. She heard it herself as a distant, flat report rolling down from her own position and into the valley below. And she understood what the men down there were experiencing, the profound disorientation of a sound that arrives after the consequence that tells you about a death that has already happened, that makes you understand you are operating in a world where the killing is faster than the information about the killing. There was no fear on a battlefield worse than that. She filed the emotional calculation away and went back to work. Third shot. Fourth. Each one deliberate, each one chosen. She was not shooting at the enemy. She was reading the enemy the way she had been reading them for 11 days. And she was removing the specific elements whose removal would cost them the most, not just in bodies, but in organization and confidence in their ability to function as a coordinated force rather than a collection of frightened individuals. She was dismantling them from the outside in. Below her, she could see the assault that had been forming the final push, the one that would have overrun the canyon, with numbers beginning to fall apart before it could coalesce. She could see the fighters pulling back into cover, not because they had been beaten, but because they did not understand what was happening to them, and confusion was more paralyzing than bullets. She found the radio frequency for Drummond's team, and she keyed her transmitter. "Bravo 7, she said. "If you can hear me, do not respond. Do not key your mic. Just listen." She waited 1 second to let the instruction land. "I have eyes on your position," she continued. "I have eyes on all of you. I know you have wounded. I know you are low on ammunition. I know what your math looks like. I want you to forget your math. Your math is wrong now because I am on your ridge and I am not going anywhere." She paused to fire twice, taking down a gunner who had been trying to creep into a new angle on the canyon. The sound of her shots was still traveling down the ridge when she continued. "Here is what is going to happen," she said. "You are going to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you, and I am going to walk you out of that valley. I have been watching your enemy for 11 days. I know their positions better than they do. I know where their reinforcements are staged. I know where the gaps are. And in approximately 90 seconds, I'm going to make you a door where there is currently a wall." She found her next target and removed him from the equation. "When I do," she said, "you are going to move fast and you are going to trust me even though you have no reason to. Do you understand me, Bravo 7? Do not respond. Just get ready." She put her eye back to the scope. Below her in the canyon, she could see Cole Drummond holding the radio handset. She could see the moment he heard her. She could not see his face clearly at this distance, but she could see the way he went still, with the specific quality of a person processing something that does not fit inside any category they already have. She had that effect on people sometimes. She fired again. The valley was not won yet. 38 men still capable of organized action. A mortar crew still functional, and 6 minutes before the assault reconstituted itself under new leadership. She had work to do. But in the canyon below, she watched Drummond turn to his men. She watched something pass through the group of them. something she recognized even at this distance because she had seen it in people before, the specific physical change that happens when a person who has accepted death is given without warning a reason to reconsider. She had given them a reason. She had burned 11 days of perfect discipline to do it. She had burned a 2-year observation operation and 9 years of operating principle and 6 years of a story she had told herself about Danny Calder and what his death had meant. She had burned all of it in the space of one exhale and one trigger pull. She found her 4th target. She breathed out. She fired. Below her, in the narrow slot of the canyon, Cole Drummond was saying something to his men. She could not hear the words at this distance, but she could see them stand up straighter. She could see them check their weapons and look at each other with the particular expression of people who have decided together that they are not finished yet. That was enough. That was in fact everything. She had the rest of her work to do. She turned her full attention back to the valley, to the 37 men still standing between Bravo 7 and the way home. And she let the calm come all the way down into her hands the way it always did, the deep and complete calm that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with purpose. She was going to bring them out of there, all of them, every single one. She had not been able to bring Danny home. She had understood for 6 years that she could not go back and change that the debt she owed existed in a currency that could not be repaid to the person she owed it to. But she had learned something in the last 4 minutes that 6 years of carrying the weight had not taught her. You could not repay the debt backward, but you could carry it forward. She could not save Danny Calder, but she could save Eli Marsh. She put her finger on the trigger. She went to work. Part 2. The Voice from the West. The first thing Cole Drummond noticed was the silence of the gun. The machine gunner on the North Ridge had been working them for 20 minutes, raking the canyon mouth in short, disciplined bursts that kept every head down and made any return fire a matter of luck rather than skill. And then between one burst and the next, the gun simply stopped. Not a reload pause, not a jam. The gun stopped the way things stopped when the person operating them was no longer capable of operating anything. Drummond had not heard a shot. That was the part that reached into his chest and did something strange to his breathing. In all the noise of the fight, all the incoming fire and the mortar impacts and the echo of their own weapons bouncing off the canyon walls, there had been no crack, no report, no sound at all to account for the gunner's death. The man had simply folded behind his weapon, and the gun had gone quiet. Then a full second later, a single flat report rolled down from the western ridge, distant, patient, final. Drummond pressed himself against the canyon wall and looked at Hale, who was looking back at him with an expression Drummond had never seen on the older man's face in 8 years of working together. It was not quite disbelief. It was the face of a person who has witnessed something that does not fit inside any category they already possess and is taking a moment to build a new one. "Nobody can reach that far," Hale said quietly. "Somebody just did," Drummond said. The second shot came before he finished the sentence. Another enemy fighter dropped, this one a squad leader who had been organizing the next push from behind a rock formation on the eastern side, and the fighters around him looked at the space where he had been standing, and then looked at each other, and then looked everywhere at once, at the ridges, at the sky, at the western faces of the valley walls. The sound arrived a second later. Same flat report, same impossible distance. Drummond grabbed the radio handset. The jamming was still there, the white wall of static that had been their ceiling since the crash. But underneath it, now cutting through in a way he could not explain, a voice. A woman's voice. It was the most controlled voice he had heard in his life, including his own, and he had spent 20 years training his voice to stay level in situations that screamed for panic. This voice was not trained to be level, it simply was level, the way a mountain is level, not because it has worked to achieve the quality, but because the quality is structural. It came through the static, and it said his call sign, and it told him not to respond. He did not respond. He listened. He listened to her tell him she had eyes on his position, that she knew his wounded, that she knew his ammunition count, that she knew what his math looked like. He listened to her tell him his math was wrong. And he listened to the sound of her rifle firing between sentences, unhurried, precisely spaced, each shot followed a second later by the evidence of its result in the changed behavior of the men below. She was not shooting at the enemy. She was reading them. He understood this after the third shot, watching through a crack in the canyon wall as she took down not the nearest target or the most exposed target, but the man whose death disrupted the enemy's ability to function most severely. A gunner here, a coordinator there, the man carrying the extra ammunition for the mortar crew, which meant the mortar crew would run dry faster than they knew. She was not fighting the battle in front of her. She was fighting the battle 3 moves ahead of where the battle currently was. Bravo 7. Her voice came through again, steadier than the signal carrying it. In approximately 90 seconds, I'm going to make you a door. When I do, you move your wounded first. Move them low, and move them now. Drummond looked at his team. Eli was against the back wall, Soren's hands keeping pressure on the wound in his side. Eli's face had the color of old paper, and his eyes were doing the thing eyes did when the body was conserving energy for survival rather than expression. Renly's leg was set wrong from the crash, braced now with material from 2 different vests functional enough to move, but not enough to fight. Soren himself had 1 working arm and was using it to do the work of 2 with the focused efficiency of a man who had decided that limitations were information, not conclusions. Hale's face was a red mask from the scalp wound that had stopped mattering to him approximately 30 seconds after it happened. Calloway had half a magazine. Drummond had less. He looked at each of them, and he did not make a speech because there was no time for speeches, and because the woman on the ridge had already said the thing that needed saying, "Your math is wrong now." And he understood that the only response to that was movement. "On your feet," he said. "Anybody who can move helps somebody who can't. We are getting out of this hole." He watched something shift in the canyon. The specific shift that happens in people when they have already done their grieving and been handed without warning a reason to ungrieve. It was not hope exactly, it was something harder than hope and more reliable. It was decision. 3 shots from the ridge came in quick succession and the voice returned. "The channel to your south is clear," she said. 60 meters. Stay low enough that your belly drags the rock. You have a 90-second window before their squad leaders notice the quiet. Drummond did not waste a single one of those seconds. "Renly, Soren, you're first. Take the ammo, go south, go low." He was already moving, already getting his arm under Eli's opposite shoulder, already calculating the geometry of getting a wounded man through a narrow channel at speed. "Hale, you're on point. Calloway on my 6. Nobody stands up. Nobody. Move." They moved. Hale went through this canyon mouth first and immediately dropped to his elbows, his rifle up his bloody face, scanning forward. Renly came next, dragging his bad leg with a determination that had no room in it for anything as optional as pain. Soren followed with the ammunition and 1 arm, which was not how ammunition was meant to be carried, but was better than leaving it behind. Drummond came through with Eli over his shoulder. The kid made a sound when they moved. A thin, compressed sound, the sound of someone swallowing a scream because they had been told not to make noise and they were going to follow that instruction if it killed them. Drummond felt the shudder of it go through Eli's body, and he moved faster. "I've got you," he said very quietly. "Don't you make a sound. I've got you." "Not making a sound, sir," Eli breathed. He made a sound anyway, very small. Drummond moved faster. The channel opened to the south exactly where she had said it would be. Deeper than it looked from above, deep enough that a man on his stomach was invisible from the ridgelines. They flowed into it the way water found a crack one after another, and for 30 seconds the only sounds were the scrape of gear against rock and the distant flat reports of the rifle on the western ridge still working, still choosing, still removing the men whose removal cost the enemy the most. Drummond counted those shots without meaning to. He had been counting since the first one. He was in the low 30s now, and he understood that each one of those was a decision made at a distance he could not fully comprehend by a person he had never met for reasons he did not yet know. "Bravo 7, stop." The voice came through hard and fast, the first time it had carried any edge at all, and Drummond froze so completely that Calloway behind him walked into his back before he could stop. "Freeze," Drummond said, not a word above a breath. "Do not move." "2-man patrol," the voice said, clipped now, each word exactly as long as it needed to be, and no longer. "Coming south through the channel toward you. They do not know you are there. 15 seconds. Drummond relayed to Hale in a voice barely louder than thought. 2 hostiles, coming at you. She can't shoot them from her angle. Knife, now." Hale did not hesitate, and he did not ask questions. He set his rifle down with the careful deliberateness of a man setting down something that mattered, and he drew his blade and he pressed himself into the shadow of the channel wall, and he became very still. Drummond had seen Hale be still before. In the field, in bad positions, in the spaces between action, where the only thing keeping you alive was your ability to look like part of the landscape. But he had never seen Hale be still quite like this. This was a different quality of stillness. This was the stillness of something very old and very patient. The seconds were not countable. Drummond stopped trying. He could hear the patrol now, their footsteps, and the low, easy conversation of two men walking a route they had walked many times in a valley they believed they owned, with no particular reason to look for what was waiting in the shadow of the channel wall. The first man came around the bend. Hale took him so fast and so completely that the man was on the ground before his body had registered that anything had happened. The second man had enough time to understand that something was wrong, not enough time to act on the understanding. There was a brief and terrible struggle, boots against rock, a sound that Drummond would file in the same place he filed all the sounds from days like this. And then Hale said, "Clear," in a voice that was still steady, but had lost some of its weight, and he sagged back against the channel wall and cleaned his blade on his trousers and did not look at what was on the ground. "Both down," the voice confirmed, as though she had watched every second of it, which she had. "Clean work? Tell your knife man that was clean work. Keep moving. Your window just shortened." Drummond moved up beside Hale and kept his voice low and even. "She says good work. Move." Hale picked up his rifle. "Tell her," he said in a voice that was trying very hard to be normal and almost achieving it, "that I'd like to buy her a drink." "Move first," Drummond said. "Drink later." They moved. For 4 minutes they crawled and hauled themselves down the channel, and every 30 seconds or so the flat crack of the rifle rolled down from the ridge, and every shot meant one fewer enemy who might turn around and find them. Drummond lost track of the count. He kept one hand on Eli's vest and his eyes on Hale's boots in front of him, and he put 1 meter behind him at a time and did not think beyond the next meter. The channel widened. The voice came back. 50 meters ahead, the channel opens into a wash. Do not enter the wash. On the eastern wall of the channel you will find a goat trail. It is faint. Most people would walk past it. You are not going to walk past it. That trail takes you up and over the low saddle to the north. On the far side of the saddle, out of the valley entirely, there is a stone structure. She paused. 1 shot from the ridge. Then, there are 3 American hostages in that structure. They are alive. They are guarded by 4 men. Drummond stopped moving. He stopped so abruptly that Calloway walked into him again, and Soren behind Calloway had to brace against the channel wall to avoid a collision. And from the back of the line there was a moment of compressed, suspended silence in which every man in the channel seemed to stop breathing at the same time. "Say again," Drummond said into the mic very quietly. "The hostages are alive." "The hostages were never in the valley," she said. "The valley was the trap. The hostages were the reason you were willing to walk into it. They have been in that stone structure the entire time, 90 seconds from your position, when you clear the saddle while the enemy waited for you to die in the canyon without ever knowing how close you were." Drummond pressed his forehead against the cold rock of the channel wall. He stayed there for 3 seconds. Then he turned to his team. To these men he had already in his heart said goodbye to, and he said the thing that needed saying in the plainest possible terms, because plain was all he had left, and plain was enough. "The hostages are alive," he said. "They're over that saddle. This was never a suicide mission. We came here to bring 3 Americans home, and we are still going to bring 3 Americans home." He looked at each of them in turn, at Hale's red-masked face, and Soren's one working arm, and Renly's braced leg, and Calloway's empty eyes filling with something that was not quite disbelief. "On me. We move." They moved. But the voice had changed. "Bravo 7. She was still controlled, but something underneath the control had shifted some quality of the signal that had nothing to do with the radio and everything to do with the person transmitting. "We have a problem." Drummond had been in enough situations to hear the thing underneath evenness when it was there. He heard it now. "Their commander finally understood what I am," she said. "He has been operating on the assumption that he has a single sniper on his flank. He just realized he has a coordinated overwatch element that has been systematically dismantling his entire assault structure. He is pulling a 6-man team off the line and sending them west, up the ridge, toward me." Drummond stopped. Say again, he said, and he broke his own silence because some things required breaking silence. They are coming for you. They are coming for me, she said. And there was no fear in it because fear was not the register she operated in. It was simply a fact being reported by a person whose job was to report facts accurately. 6 of them. Trained, moving well, 8 minutes to my elevation. In 8 minutes, I am either going to be very busy or I am going to be off this net. Either way, this is the part where I stop being able to hold your hand. Negative, Drummond said, and the force of it surprised him. Negative, we can turn back, we can come to you, we can lay suppressive fire on that ridge. No. For the first time, she raised her voice. Not much. Enough. Listen to me, Drummond. You have 7 men. One of them is carrying a bullet. One of them cannot use an arm. One of them cannot walk correctly. If you turn your broken team around and try to climb an open ridge to reach me, you will lose all of them. And I will have wasted every single one of these shots. A pause shorter than a breath. You have a mission. Your mission is those hostages and getting your people home. My job is this ridge. Let me do my job. Drummond pressed his back against the channel wall. He looked at the western ridge above him at the rock he could not see past, and he said nothing for a moment because she was right, and he had been right often enough in his life to recognize what it felt like from the outside. Who are you? He said quietly. You know this valley like you built it. You know our positions, our names, our ammunition count. You've been here before we were. Who are you? That, she said, is not a question you get answered today, maybe not ever. The faintest pause. Focus, Drummond. Here is the rest of your route. You are going to memorize it because I need my hands for other things now. She gave it to him fast and clean the way she did everything. Channel to the Wash Goat Trail on the eastern wall, up and over the saddle stone structure on the far side. 4 guards. 7 Americans against 4 guards who did not know they were coming was a fight they would win. When you go in, she said, and her voice did something at the edges that he could not quite name, something that was not quite warmth, but was the direction warmth moved in. The guard on the north corner is the fast one. Take him first. Then she said, Drummond, the north corner guard is fast. Don't miss. And then the net went to static, and she was gone. Sir? Calloway was looking at the radio. She knew your name. You never said your name. I know, Drummond said. How did she know your name? I don't know. He said it plainly because it was the plain truth and because the fact of it that she had known his name before he ever spoke it, that she had been watching and listening long enough to know all of them. Every name, every role, every habit should have been unsettling, and instead was the most comforting thing he had learned all day. Because it meant she had not stumbled into this valley any more than the enemy had. It meant she had been here watching for a long time before the helicopter went down. It meant she had chosen this. Whatever she was giving up on that ridge, she had chosen to give it up. He did not have words for what that meant. He put the words away for later and looked at the goat trail on the eastern wall of the channel, faint and nearly invisible, exactly where she had said it would be. I see it, Hale said. Then we climb, Drummond said. They climbed. The trail was barely a trail. It was the suggestion of a trail, the ghost of a path left by animals that had crossed this ground for generations and had worn the stone just enough that a careful eye could follow it. Drummond followed it with Eli over his shoulder, and he talked to the kid the whole way up because Eli's responses were getting slower, and he needed to know Eli was still there. Talk to me, he said. Keep talking. I'm here, sir, Eli said against his back. Sir, can I ask you something? Ask. The voice, Eli said, and his voice was soft and blurred at the edges. The woman on the radio, is she real or am I losing it? She's real, Drummond said. She's the most real thing in this valley. Is she going to be okay? The 6 men going up after her. Don't, Drummond said, not unkindly. Don't do that math. You focus on breathing and I'll focus on the trail. That's our whole job right now. Copy, Eli said. And then, she sounds like someone who's going to be okay. Drummond said nothing. Behind him, from somewhere on the western ridge, the rhythm of the rifle changed. He noticed it the way you noticed a change in someone's breathing when your hand was on their shoulder. The shots had been slow, measured the cadence of a person with time and precision and no particular urgency. Now they came faster, in pairs. with pauses between them that had a different shape, pauses where she was moving rather than choosing. She was displacing. The 6 men had reached her elevation. Drummond climbed faster. They reached the saddle as the sun crossed the midpoint of the sky, and Drummond set Eli down in the cover of the ridgeline and got his first look at the far side. And there it was. A low stone structure, weathered and old, sitting 40 yards down the slope, with the patient permanence of something that had been built before anyone living had been born. 4 guards, one at the north corner, exactly as she had described. "Hail," Drummond said, and his voice was absolutely steady because that was the only thing it was allowed to be right now. "North corner is yours. He's the fast one. You do not miss that shot." Hale wiped the blood from his eyes with the back of his glove and checked his sight picture. "I don't miss, sir." "I know you don't." Drummond looked at Calloway, looked at Soren, looked at Renly, who would cover the saddle with his broken leg braced against the rock, watching for anything that came over from the valley side. He thought of Shay, who had not made it out of the helicopter and would never see how this ended. He thought of a woman on a ridge he could not see moving in tight, urgent pairs, now displacing fighting 6 men alone so that the rest of them could have this moment. He thought, "Don't you miss either." "Mark," he said. They went over the saddle. The next 90 seconds were the fastest of the entire day. Hale took the north corner guard with a single shot before the man could raise his weapon exactly as promised. Calloway dropped one of the near-side guards cleanly. Drummond took the other. The 4th guard got a burst off into the dark air before Hale put him down too, and then Drummond was running 20 yards 10. His shoulder hit the door and he went through it with his rifle up and his heart somewhere in his throat. 3 people, bound at the wrists. Filthy. Gaunt. Blinking in the sudden violence of his entry. 2 women and a man, all in civilian clothing, all bearing the specific worn-down look of people who had been afraid for a very long time and had begun to make a kind of peace with it, and were now being required to feel something else, and did not yet have the capacity. He saw the moment the man understood. He saw it happen in the man's face, the way the flag on Drummond's shoulder registered, and then what the flag meant registered, and then what all of it meant registered. "United States Navy," Drummond said, and his voice broke on the second word, and he did not care. "We're here. You're safe." One of the women began to cry. The man said thank you. He said it over and over, and each time he said it, he meant it more completely than the time before, and Drummond was already moving, already cutting the bindings, already getting Hale and Calloway in through the door to take positions. He keyed the radio. "Bravo 7, we have the packages, all 3 alive and mobile." And then the extraordinary thing happened. The static broke, not faded. Broke. Clean and sudden, like a door opening. And through the open door came a voice from the command element that had spent the last hour believing Bravo 7 was already dead. "Bravo 7, this is Overlord. Say again, you have all 3 packages." "Overlord, affirmative. All 3 American hostages alive. We have wounded. We need immediate exfil." A pause that lasted exactly long enough for someone to understand something they had not expected to understand. "Bravo 7, be advised your comms were jammed for 62 minutes. We lost you completely. We had you listed..." Another pause. "We had you listed as gone." "We're not gone," Drummond said. "Exfil is inbound. Be advised we had no assets in your area of operations. No air, no overwatch, no support element. You were the only Americans in that valley." Drummond went very still. "Say again, Overlord." "Bravo 7, I say again. There were no friendly forces assigned to your operation beyond your own team. Whatever happened out there..." The operator's voice had something in it now, a quality of careful uncertainty. "It did not come from us." Drummond stood in the doorway of the stone structure with the radio in his hand and looked west at the ridge he could not see past, at the place where a woman who did not exist on any American roster had spent the last hour spending herself so that 7 strangers could have this moment. "Overlord," he said slowly, "I have reason to believe there is a friendly element operating on the western ridge of this valley. A single shooter, female. She is the reason my team is alive. She is currently under attack by a 6-man element that went up the ridge after her." He paused. "I am formally requesting that exfil assets be tasked to recover her." A long silence. "Bravo 7." A different voice now, older. the voice of a man who had spent his career being the last word in rooms where last words mattered. There is no friendly element in your area. There is no woman. I am advising you to focus on your own exfil. Drummond heard exactly what the voice was telling him. He heard the thing underneath it, the thing the words were designed to carry while appearing to say something else. He heard the absolute deliberate certainty of a man who was not confused about the facts, but had very specific reasons for stating them the way he was stating them. Overlord Actual, Drummond said, with respect. Focus on your wounded and your packages, Commander. Is that understood? Outside from the western ridge, the sound of the rifle came again. But the rhythm was wrong. He heard it, and he knew it the way he knew the sound of his own heartbeat. The slow, patient cadence was gone. What came from the ridge now was faster, tighter, with a quality of urgency that he had not heard in it until this moment. She was still there. She was still fighting. Calloway appeared in the doorway beside him, looking west. "Sir," Calloway said quietly. "Sir, look." Drummond looked. On the western ridge, small with distance but clear against the pale rock, a figure was moving along the ridgeline with the rapid, low movement of someone covering ground while under fire. Behind the figure, muzzle flashes. The six-man team closed now, close enough that the engagement had become something personal and immediate rather than a long-range hunting problem. He watched her make a jump across a gap in the rock that he could not have made himself. Watched her roll and come up, still moving, still fighting, still returning fire over her shoulder as she ran. She was still alive. And then she went down. Not a fall, a collapse. One moment moving, the next on one knee, and the next moment not moving at all, flat on her back against the rock. And for a horrible stretched second, Drummond thought that was the end of it. That was where the story of the woman on the ridge ended, on her back in the open with six men closing in. Then she got up. Slower, one leg dragging, but up. She turned to face the six men. She raised her rifle. "No," Drummond said very quietly. He was already moving toward the door, already making a calculation that had nothing to do with orders or mission parameters or the voice on the radio telling him there was no one on that ridge. "No, no, no. Sir." Hale's hand on his arm. "Sir, our exfil is inbound. We have 3 hostages and 4 wounded. I'm not leaving her up there. She told you not to come back. She told you." "I know what she told me." He stood in the doorway and he watched the figure on the ridge and he watched the 6 men closing in, and he understood in the same moment that she understood what she was doing. She had stopped running. She had planted herself. She was standing in the open, wounded, visible, impossible to miss. She was making herself a target on purpose. And she was waiting. She was waiting for them to do exactly what men always did when they saw a wounded, cornered target. She was waiting for them to stop being a distributed threat and become a concentrated one. He watched them take the bait. He watched them close the distance, tightening into a cluster, and he saw the moment she made her decision, because her arm went back and then forward and something small arced through the air between her and the 6 men. The explosion reached the valley a full second after the flash. When the sound arrived, the 6 men were gone and the figure on the ridge was down flat on her back, not moving. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Drummond had heard all day. "She got them," Calloway said. His voice was barely there. "Sir, she got all 6 of them." Drummond looked at the ridge. He looked at the still figure on the rock. He looked at the exfil helicopters cutting through the sky toward them, rotors beating, carrying the medics and the manifest, and the carefully prepared records of who was supposed to be in this valley and who was not. He made a decision. He turned to the nearest crew chief and he did not ask. "That ridge," he said, pointing west. "There is a friendly down up there. 1 person. I need you to put me and 1 other man on that saddle before we leave this valley." The crew chief started to say something about manifests, about orders, about the voice that had come over the command net telling everyone that there was no one on that ridge. Drummond looked at him. The crew chief stopped talking. He keyed his radio to the pilot. The helicopter's nose swung west. Drummond grabbed Hale, who was already checking his rifle with the expression of a man who had already made the same decision and was simply waiting to be acknowledged. 90 seconds, Drummond said. "We go up, we get her, we come back." "For her," Hale said. "I'll do it on 1 leg." He paused. "Let's go get our ghost, sir." The bird flared over the saddle. They jumped. Part 3. Say her name." She was lying on her back among the rocks with her rifle still in her hand. That was the first thing Drummond registered when he crested the ridge. Not the blood, though there was a great deal of it. Not the stillness of her, though it stopped his heart for a full second. The first thing he registered was that even now, even like this, her hand had not let go of the rifle. He dropped to his knees beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. A pulse. Faint and thready and working too hard to maintain itself, but there. "She's alive." He said it loud enough for Hale to hear over the rotors. "She's alive. Help me get her up." He put his hand against her face. Hey, can you hear me? We're here. We came back for you." Her eyes opened. Not all the way. Just enough. A slit of dark eyes finding his face with the specific, focused effort of someone working against considerable resistance, and for a moment she just looked at him. This man she had spent the last hour saving, whose name she had known before he ever climbed off the helicopter, and something moved across her face that was too complicated to be a single emotion. Her lips moved. He leaned down to hear her. "I told you," she said in a voice like dry leaves, "not to come back, Commander." And Cole Drummond, gathering her broken body up into his arms with Hale, taking her legs, felt something crack open in his chest that had nothing to do with the mission and everything to do with the fact that this woman, this person who had just spent the last hour dying by inches on a ridge for people she had never met, was spending the first words of her survival on an "I told you so." "Yeah," he said, and his voice was unsteady in a way he did not try to correct. "Turns out I'm real bad at following orders from people who don't exist. Now hold on. We're taking you home." They got her down to the bird in under 90 seconds. The medic on the exfil helicopter went very still for just a moment when he took in the full scope of what he was looking at, the way experienced medical personnel went, still not from shock, but from the rapid triage of a person cataloging damage in order of priority. Then his hands started moving and did not stop. "Sir, I need a name. I need something for the trauma team." Drummond leaned close to her face. Her eyes had drifted shut again, and her breathing had a quality he did not like, shallow and working. "Hey, stay with me. I need your name. You know mine. Give me yours." Her lips moved. He put his ear against them. "Vance," she breathed. "Nora Vance." "Nora Vance." Drummond repeated loud and clear. Loud enough for the medic, loud enough for Calloway across the cabin, loud enough for the radio if anyone was listening. "Her name is Nora Vance. You write that down. You put it in every record you have. Nora Vance was here." The medic keyed his radio and began relaying to the ship. Drummond heard the pause on the other end. Heard someone say "no record." Heard someone else say again the name. He felt his jaw tighten and he held her hand, the right one, the one that had not let go of the rifle even when the rest of her was failing, and he held it the way you held on to something you were not going to let the current take. Her heart stopped the first time 20 minutes into the flight. He watched the medic bring her back, and he kept talking to her the way he had talked to Eli in the canyon, low and steady, the voice of someone who has decided that the person they are talking to is going to hear what they are saying, and it is simply a matter of continuing until they do. "You held that ridge against 6 men, he told her. "You are not going to be beaten by a helicopter ride. That is a ridiculous way to go, and you know it. So you hold on. That is not an order. I know the rules. It is a request, one operator to another. Hold on, Nora Vance." Her heart stopped the second time 4 minutes later. The medic brought her back again. Drummond did not let go of her hand. They landed on the ship with the controlled urgency of a trauma response that had been briefed on casualties in flight, and the deck was organized chaos. The kind of chaos that had a structure underneath it if you knew how to look. The trauma team took her at a run, and Drummond ran alongside for as long as they would let him, which was not far. And then a hand landed flat on his chest, and a corpsman said, "This is as far as you go, sir." And the hatch closed, and she was gone. He stood in the passageway with her blood drying on his hands, and the particular hollowness of a person who has been in motion for a very long time, and has suddenly, without warning, been required to stop. The next 14 hours were the longest of his life. He got updates on his team. Good ones. Eli came out of surgery and would recover the round, having missed everything that mattered, by margins that the surgeon described as either extraordinary luck or extraordinary geometry. Soren's shoulder was repaired. Renly's leg was set. The 3 hostages were treated and stabilized and were already being processed for transfer to a proper medical facility. The Navy did what the Navy did and moved forward and accounted for everyone on the manifest. Everyone on the manifest. Every hour or so, Drummond walked to the hatch at the far end of the ship, and every hour or so the men in plain clothes turned him around. They did not touch him. They did not raise their voices. They simply occupied the space between him and the hatch with the patient immovability of people whose entire professional existence was the management of exactly this kind of situation. He went back to the ready room. He sat down, and for the first time since the helicopter went down, he had nothing immediate to do, and so he did the thing he had been preventing himself from doing since the moment he heard 6 men were climbing the ridge toward her position. He took out a sheet of paper and he wrote down everything he had witnessed in precise chronological order in his own handwriting, with times where he had them and approximations where he did not. Then he went to find his team. He found Hale first in a passageway 2 decks down, his scalp wound stitched into a neat line that would leave a scar he would carry for the rest of his life. Drummond told him what he was doing and why. Hale took the pen and wrote without hesitation in the large, deliberate handwriting of a man who wanted every word to be legible, and signed his name at the bottom and added the time. He found Calloway next. Then Soren, who wrote left-handed because the right arm was still immobilized, but whose account was no less precise for it. Then Renly, then Birch. He sat with each of them separately in different parts of the ship at different times, and each of them wrote what they had seen in their own words and in their own handwriting and signed their names. 6 sworn statements, 6 different handwritings, 6 accounts of the same woman, the same voice, the same impossible shooting from the Western Ridge, all collected and dated and timed before anyone in the system had reached any of them. He put the 6 statements in a single envelope, and he gave the envelope to the one person on this ship who he had identified in the way that people who have spent their lives reading rooms and situations identify things as someone who was here for a different reason than the others. Captain Aldrin did not give his name when he came to the ready room. He sat down across from Drummond, set 2 cups of coffee on the table, and pushed one across with the deliberateness of a man who had thought carefully about whether to come at all and had decided for reasons of his own that he was going to. He told Drummond that Nora Vance was alive. He said it first before anything else because he was a person who understood the architecture of a conversation and knew which load-bearing wall to establish before building anything on top of it. Drummond put his face in his hands and stayed there for a moment. She flatlined a 3rd time on the table, Aldrin said, not without gentleness. They brought her back. She lost a significant amount of blood and she will be a long time healing. But she is going to live. I thought you should hear that from someone. Thank you, Drummond said, and his voice came out in pieces. Now, Aldrin said, the hard part. He told Drummond about Griffin Unit in the careful, measured way of a man disclosing exactly what was necessary and not one word beyond it. He told him about the assignment 11 days of observation, the target who had been watched for 2 years. He told him about the standing orders. Observe, do not engage, do not reveal your position under any circumstances. He told him that Nora Vance had held those orders perfectly. Until she didn't. She watched your helicopter go down, Aldrin said. She watched the trap close. She watched 46 men move on 8. And she was under standing orders to let it happen because her mission had a value that the arithmetic of 8 lives could not outweigh. He was quiet for a moment. She has watched Americans die before and held her position because that was what the mission required. She had done it before, 6 years ago. Drummond looked up. Aldrin told him about Danny. He told him the way you told people things that needed to be said plainly because there was no version of them that was not hard. A different ridge, a different assignment, a teammate caught in the open, a shot that Nora had and did not take because her orders said hold. She had held. Danny had died. And she had carried it every single day for 6 years, building her professional identity around the necessity of it, around the brutal arithmetic that said the mission came first. When she watched your youngest man go down in the canyon, Aldrin said, I do not think she was in your valley anymore. I think she was back on that other ridge. And I think she decided that she would rather burn down everything she had built than hold her position one more time and watch it happen again. The ready room was very quiet. She saved us, Drummond said, because she couldn't save him. She saved all of you, Aldrin agreed. And now there are men 1 deck up who have a problem. Their problem is you. 10 witnesses, a medic with her name in a radio log, and a commander who climbed a ridge against a direct order from Overlord Actual to retrieve a person the United States military has no official record of. Drummond understood where this was going. Aldrin told him plainly. The clean story, the easy path, the report that was already drafted and waiting for his signature. Allied forces unknown friendly support identity unconfirmed. A story that was technically accurate in all its individual components and a lie in every way that mattered. And if I sign it, Drummond said, your career continues, your record stays spotless, the hostages go home, your men go home, and Nora Vance disappears back into the program that made her accept harder this time because now there is active institutional motivation to make sure she stays disappeared. And if I don't, Aldrin was quiet for a moment. Then there is a fight, an ugly one. They will come at your record, your psychological fitness, your men. They will make each of your team choose between their careers and corroborating a story about a woman the Navy says does not exist. He looked at Drummond steadily. I am not going to lie to you about what it costs. Drummond thought about the canyon. He thought about the moment he had looked at his men and told them it was not their fault, with no way out and no reason to believe they would be alive in an hour. He thought about a calm voice cutting through white noise like a hand reaching through a wall, and the way the valley had changed around that voice, and the way 7 men who had already said goodbye had found reasons to reach for their weapons one more time. He thought about what it cost to be the person who made that possible. She burned everything, he said. 9 years of being invisible, a 2-year operation, her standing orders, and the career she built on following them. She set it all on fire because she could not sit on that ridge and listen to us say goodbye. He looked at Aldrin. What kind of man would I be if I wasn't willing to risk a career for a woman who was willing to risk her entire existence for people she had never met? Aldrin looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. That, he said, is exactly what I hoped you would say. He stood and picked up his untouched coffee and paused at the hatch. In about 2 hours, they are going to bring you into a room and hand you a very clean piece of paper. Before that happens, I suggest you go see her. She has been asking whether you signed her death certificate or her birth certificate, and I think you should be the one to tell her it is neither. Not yet. He opened the hatch. She is awake for now. The corpsman at the end of the passageway studied his clipboard with extraordinary concentration as Drummond walked past him to the hatch that had been closed to him for 14 hours. He went through it and into the small humming compartment where Nora Vance lay surrounded by the machinery of recovery, pale as the sheet beneath her, but with eyes that found him the moment he stepped through the door, with the same precise focus she had probably brought to every target she had ever acquired. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. You look terrible, Commander, she said. Long day, he said. He pulled the chair to her bedside and sat, and he looked at her properly for the first time, this person he had known as a voice and a set of impossible shots, and a figure moving against a ridgeline, now reduced to the basic human fact of a woman in a bed fighting to stay in a world that had been trying for several hours to remove her from it. How are you? I've had better, she said. She studied him with those dark eyes. The hostages. Alive. All 3, home or on their way. She closed her eyes. Something moved across her face, large and complicated, and he let it move without interruption because some things needed room. Eli, she said. He stared at her. How do you know his name? I have been listening to your team for 11 days, Drummond. The ghost of the dry humor was there even now, even here. I know all your names. I know Hale is your steady one, and Calloway is your warrior, and Eli is your kid. I knew all of you before I ever fired a shot. Her eyes found his. That is why I could not do it. You were not strangers to me by the time your bird went down. I had been listening to you keep those men alive for 11 days, and I could not sit on that ridge and listen to you say goodbye to them. He leaned forward and put his arms on his knees and looked at her. They are telling me you don't exist, he said. I know. There are men outside that hatch right now who are going to put a very clean piece of paper in front of me in about 2 hours and ask me to sign it. I know that too. She held his gaze steadily. Drummond, sign it. Take care of your men. Let me disappear. I made my peace with disappearing a long time ago. That is the deal I signed up for, and I knew it when I signed it. You do not owe me anything, not one thing. I owe you 7 lives, he said, including mine. "That is not a debt," she said. "That was a choice, my choice. You do not get to carry it." "I'm going to say your name," he said. "In that room in 2 hours, I am going to say your name, and I am going to put it on the record, and I am going to make it stick. I have 6 sworn statements from 6 operators, all written before anyone in this system got near them. And I have a captain who brought me coffee instead of a non-disclosure agreement." He leaned forward. "You saved 7 people, Nora. You do not get to vanish for it. You get to exist for it." She looked at him for a long time. One tear moved down the side of her face and disappeared into the pillow. "They will slow your career for this," she said. "Or end it. Maybe. I am not worth your career." "You let me decide what you are worth," he said. "You reached across an entire valley to pull 7 strangers out of the dark. Let somebody do the same for you, just this once." She did not answer. But she did not look away, and after a moment her hand moved and he took it, and she held on. 2 hours later they put him in the room. Gray table, gray walls, 4 people who had been doing this long enough to be very good at it. The pleasant man with the clean folder, the woman in the suit with the careful eyes, the colonel who had not moved when Drummond came in and did not move now, and someone from the legal division whose presence was its own kind of message. The pleasant man explained the report. Allied forces. Unknown support element. Identity unconfirmed. Technically accurate. Clean. Easy. Drummond let him finish. Then he said, "Her name is Nora Vance." The temperature in the room changed. He said everything. He said it clearly and in order and without raising his voice. He said her name twice more while he said it, because names mattered, because the specific act of saying a name was the specific act of refusing to let a person become an abstraction. He said what she had done, shot by shot, instruction by instruction. He said that she had flatlined 3 times on this ship's surgical table and been brought back 3 times, and that there were surgeons on this vessel with her blood dried under their fingernails, and that he had 6 sworn statements from 6 operators in 6 different handwritings that he had already given to someone who was not in this room. The colonel went very still when he mentioned the statements. The pleasant man's pleasantness thinned slightly at the edges. The woman in the suit said, "Do you understand what programs like this protect? What disappears when they are exposed? How many people are kept safe by things that cannot officially exist?" Drummond said yes. He said he understood completely. He said he would never speak the word Griffin again in his life, and he meant it. He said he would accept any classification level they wanted to put on what had happened in that valley. "But her name goes in the record," he said. "Sealed, classified, locked in a vault until the sun burns out. I don't care. It exists. She existed. She was there. That is the line, and I am not moving it." The colonel told him what it would cost, precisely, methodically, without personal feeling. The psychological review, the notation in his file, the promotion boards that would read the notation, the way it would reach his men, the choice it would force on each of them. Drummond listened to all of it. "You found the one thing that would actually work on me," he said. "My men. And you are almost right." He looked at the colonel. "Almost. Because you made one mistake. You assumed I had not already talked to them." He watched the colonel's expression shift. 6 sworn statements, 6 operators, all dated in time before this meeting, all already in the hands of someone who decided the hard way was worth it. He paused. "You know exactly who I mean." The door opened. Captain Aldrin walked in. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room reorganized itself around him the way rooms reorganize themselves around people who had spent long enough at the center of difficult things that authority had become structural, like the load-bearing walls. He sat down. He placed his own folder on the table. It was thicker than the one they had given Drummond. He spoke for 11 minutes. Drummond counted. He spoke about the program and what it was worth and what it was not worth. He spoke about Nora Vance in particular, about what 9 years of perfect discipline looked like, about what it meant, that the one time she had broken that discipline it was to save lives rather than take them. He spoke about the enemy commander she had been watching, and the fact that the man was now dead, which meant the observation mission had concluded regardless of how it concluded, which meant she had not burned an active operation but ended a completed one ahead of schedule. And he pushed his thicker folder across the table to Drummond. Drummond read it. Every word, every line, the valley, the trap, the canyon, the voice on the net, The impossible shots, the route through the channel, the hostages, the ridge, the grenade, the recovery. And her name over and over appearing in each section where it belonged. Lieutenant Commander Nora Vance credited. Real entered into the permanent record of the United States Navy under a classification level that would keep it sealed for decades and could not, under any legal framework available to anyone in this room, be made to disappear. He picked up the pen. He looked at Aldrin. "When I was in that canyon," he said, "before she ever fired a shot, I told my youngest man that we were both getting out of that valley. I had no reason to believe it. I just knew it. And I want to think that somewhere in me, I already knew that the world does not let good people die that easily, that somebody always comes." He signed his name, slowly, clearly, permanently. Aldrin took the folder and closed it. Something in the tired lines of his face had changed. "There is someone one deck down," he said, "who has been asking whether you signed her death certificate or her birth certificate." He stood. "I think you should be the one to tell her." Drummond walked out of the gray room past the colonel, who would not meet his eyes, past the woman in the suit who was already reaching for her phone, past the pleasant man who had, for the first time all day, nothing pleasant to say. He went down one deck. He went through the hatch. Nora Vance turned her head on the pillow and found him with her eyes before he had taken 2 steps into the room, and he saw the question there, saw the bracing in her face, the specific set of a person who has spent 9 years expecting to be erased and has not yet been given sufficient reason to expect anything different. He sat down beside her. He took his time because he wanted to remember her face when he said it. "I signed something," he said, "just not what they wanted me to sign." Her jaw tightened. "Drummond, your name is in the record, Nora." He said it quietly and he said it straight. "Permanent. Lieutenant Commander Nora Vance, credited by name. Sealed. Classified. Nobody is reading it at any parade. But it exists. You exist. In the official record of the United States Navy, there is now a document that says you were in that valley, that you were real, and that 7 people are alive today because of you. And nobody, not the colonel, not any of them, can ever make it not exist." She did not move. She stared at him, and he watched 9 years of certainty begin to crack apart behind her eyes, the absolute conviction that the deal was the deal, that she would do the work and receive nothing and vanish, and he watched that conviction lose to something it had never once been required to compete with. "That is not possible," she whispered. "It happened about 20 minutes ago," he said. She put her hand over her face. He did not look away. He had learned from her on a ridge she did not know he had been watching, that some things needed a witness. Some things a person had earned the right to feel in front of another human being without apology. When she lowered her hand, her eyes were red, and her face was open in a way he suspected very few people had ever been permitted to see. "Your career," she said. "The colonel. He will do whatever he does," Drummond said. "I've made my peace with it. The same way you made your peace with disappearing." He held her gaze. "And you know what I found out? The version of me that wouldn't sign that lie is the only version of me I actually want to be. You did that. Up on that ridge, you showed me what it looks like when somebody throws everything away to do the decent thing." He paused. "I just tried to be worth the example." She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the ship moved through the water with the steady indifference of things that were larger than any single moment happening on them. "You barely knew me," she said finally. "You still barely know me." "So did you," he said. 7 strangers on a radio. So we're even." She almost smiled. It was the realest thing he had seen all day. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, "about why I could not hold that position." She looked at her hands, the right one wrapped and immobilized by bandaging. "It was not just Danny, though it was Danny. It was 11 days of listening to you talk to those men, listening to the way you talked to Eli, the way Hale talked to Calloway, the way all of you talk to each other. I know what it sounds like when people love each other without saying it. I know what it sounds like when a group of people have decided that the person next to them matters more than their own survival." She paused. "I had not heard that in a very long time. And when your bird went down and the trap closed, I was not watching strangers. I was watching people I had already come to know. and I could not watch people I knew die in a hole in the rock because my orders said to. Drummond said nothing for a moment. Then, when you go back, I am going back, she said without inflection. Not a question. I know. He did know. He had known it since the ridge. When you go back, don't disappear on me. I fought too hard to make you exist. I gave up stripes for it. You vanishing would make me feel like I overpaid. The dry humor moved through her face like a brief light. I won't disappear. I always know where to find you. I've been watching people for a living for 9 years. She paused. You were never hard to keep track of, Drummond. Not from the beginning. He stood because the corpsman would be back, and the 14 hours of looking over his shoulder at that hatch had left him without any reserve for pretending he was not exhausted. He looked down at her. Rest, he said. That is an order. I have the authority to give you that one. Noted, she said. He moved toward the hatch. Drummond. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for coming back up that ridge. Nobody ever did that before. Came back for me. He looked at her for a moment. Somebody always comes back, he said. That is the only thing I know how to believe in anymore. You just proved it first. He went through the hatch. Behind him in the small humming compartment, Nora Vance lay in the growing dark and felt for the first time in 9 years the unfamiliar and slightly terrifying sensation of being a person who existed in a record somewhere whose name was written in ink that no one could unmake, whose presence in a valley on a specific day had been witnessed and documented and sealed into the permanent memory of a country that had spent nearly a decade pretending she was not one of its own. She was not nothing anymore. She had stopped being nothing in a gray room 2 decks up. In the moment, a man she had met through a radio and a rifle scope had picked up a pen and written her name like it was the simplest and most obvious thing in the world. She closed her eyes. Outside, the ship moved through the dark water, somewhere on a ridge that no map would ever mark. The wind moved through empty rock and waited with the patient and absolute certainty of things that did not need to be watched to continue existing for the next ghost who would come to lie in the cold and look through glass at a valley below and carry the weight of what it meant to see everything and touch nothing. It would not wait long. It never did. But for now, in a small compartment on a ship that officially was not carrying her, Nora Vance breathed in and breathed out, and the machines counted each breath, and each one was real, and each one was hers, and that was enough. That was for the first time in a very long time exactly enough.